My name is Arthur Gomes, and I used to be a detective. I say used to be because the man who now wears my face and carries my badge is merely a shell, a hollowed-out echo of the person who walked into the Silvera house on that unnervingly quiet Tuesday morning. Before that day, my world was one of facts, evidence, and the cold, hard logic of human depravity. I believed in monsters, but only the kind that breathed, bled, and could be locked behind bars. The supernatural was a comforting fiction, a collection of campfire stories for those who needed a boogeyman more exotic than the monster next door. My reality was concrete and steel, the smell of stale coffee in the precinct, the reassuring weight of my sidearm at my hip. I was in control. The Silvera case was a ghost file, a 3-year-old mystery that had been gathering dust until a slow month, and a captain with a penchant for clearing old dockets landed it on my desk. A family of 4, Paulo, Mariana, and their 2 young children, Sofia and Leo, had vanished from their stately, if somewhat isolated home in the hills overlooking Curitiba. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, no financial troubles. Their car was still in the garage, their breakfast half-eaten on the kitchen table. They had simply ceased to be. The house stood as their silent, decaying monument. My partner, Miguel, a man whose skepticism made my own look like fervent belief, came with me for the initial walkthrough. The air inside was thick and still, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like rotting flowers. Sunlight struggled through grime-caked windows, illuminating floating dust motes in thick theatrical beams. "Place gives me the creeps," Miguel muttered, running a gloved finger over a layer of dust on the mantelpiece. "It's like a museum of a dead life." I grunted in agreement, my focus on the methodical process. I documented everything, the quiet order of the scene a stark contrast to the chaos of their disappearance. In the daughter's room, painted a cheerful but now peeling pink, a small wooden music box sat on a nightstand. It was intricately carved, but the lid was cracked and the winding key was missing. A broken toy. I noted it and moved on. That was the first time I heard it. A faint, tinny melody, just a few notes, like a stray signal from a distant radio. I paused. "Did you hear that?" Miguel looked up from his notepad. "Hear what? The house groaning? This place is probably about to collapse on us, Arthur." I dismissed it. Old houses settle. Wind whistles through cracks. My mind was playing tricks on me, primed by the unsettling atmosphere. We spent hours there, the silence broken only by our footsteps and the creak of floorboards. As we were about to leave, I stood in the doorway of the little girl's room one last time. And there it was again, clearer this time. A delicate, haunting lullaby. It seemed to come directly from the broken music box. I stepped closer, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. The box was inert, covered in a thick, undisturbed layer of dust. It couldn't have made a sound. "Wind," I told myself, the word sounding hollow in the oppressive silence. But I knew, with a primal certainty that defied all logic, that it wasn't the wind. It was the first thread being pulled, the first subtle tear in the fabric of my well-ordered reality. I was a man of facts, but for the first time in my career, I had encountered a detail that refused to be categorized, an anomaly that whispered of an entirely different set of rules. The house became an obsession. I returned alone the next day, telling Miguel I wanted to re-examine the physical evidence without distraction. The truth was, I was chasing a ghost note, a melody that had taken root in my mind. The house was colder this time, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the weather. As I walked the silent halls, I felt a distinct and unnerving sensation of being watched. It was a pressure at the back of my neck, the kind of feeling that makes the fine hairs on your arms stand on end. I would spin around, expecting to see someone, but there was only ever the decaying furniture and the long distorted shadows. The music was bolder now. It would start and stop unpredictably, a phantom lullaby echoing from Sophia's room. I tried to record it on my phone, but the playback was only static. I was a detective, and my evidence was dissolving into thin air. My skepticism was a shield, but it was cracking under the strain. I searched for rational explanations. A neighbor's wind chimes? No, the nearest house was over a kilometer away. A hidden electronic device? I swept the room with a detector. Nothing. One afternoon, while sifting through family photos left behind, a book fell from a high shelf in the study. It wasn't one of the Silvera's books. It was an old, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and yellowed. The name on the inside cover was not Paulo or Mariana. It was Elias Thorne, 1928. A name that meant nothing to me. Curiosity, that most dangerous of human traits, took hold. I took the diary home. A decision I now know sealed my fate. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. That night, as I sat in my sterile apartment, the city lights a comforting blaze outside my window, I began to read. And my world began to end. The diary was my descent into hell. Elias Thorne, it turned out, was the man who had built the house. He was a wealthy industrialist, a man of stern principles and even sterner possession. The journal began as a mundane record of his life, but its tone slowly darkened, spiraling into an obsessive, paranoid testament of a man consumed by a monstrous love for his only daughter, Eleonora. She was his world, his light, his property. He wrote of her beauty, her laughter, and her music box, a gift he'd commissioned from a craftsman in Germany. It was her most prized possession. Then he wrote of her betrayal. Eleonora had fallen in love with a young man of no standing, a common laborer. They planned to elope. Elias, in his madness, saw this not as love, but as theft. "She is mine," he wrote, the script growing jagged and wild. "Her soul is bound to this house, to me. She will never leave." The final entries were a terrifying blend of grief and cold, calculated ritual. He hadn't just mourned her attempt to leave, he had punished it. He locked her in her room, the one that would one day belong to Sofia Silvera, and let her waste away, a prisoner of his love. But death was not enough. The last pages were filled with arcane symbols and descriptions of a dark pact, a ritual designed to sever a soul from its natural course and bind it to a physical place. An anchor. The anchor, he wrote with triumphant finality, was her music box. He had not saved his daughter. He had cursed her, transforming her spirit into a lure, a siren song of sorrow that would be overseen by his own malevolent will, a spectral warden ensuring no family would ever be happy within those walls again. He had created a trap, and the house was the mechanism. I slammed the diary shut, my hands trembling. This was insanity, the ravings of a madman from a century ago. It couldn't be real. But as I sat there, in the dead of night, I heard it, faintly, through the walls of my own apartment, hundreds of kilometers from that house. The tinny, sweet melody of the music box. My world shattered. There was no denying it anymore. This wasn't a case of missing persons. It was a case of consumption. The house was a predator, and the Silvera family was its latest meal. I tried to explain it to Miguel. I sat him down in a cafe, the diary on the table between us, and laid it all out. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and deep concern. "Arthur," he said gently, his voice low, "you're exhausted. This case, it's gotten to you. A century-old diary and a sound you think you're hearing. It's stress. Let's talk to the captain, get you some time off." His dismissal was a physical blow. The skepticism I once cherished was now a wall between me and the only other person I trusted. He was the rational world, and he was casting me out. "You don't believe me," I whispered, the realization dawning. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, with this impossible truth. I went to see the retired detective who had first handled the case, a man named Silva. I found him in a small, cluttered apartment that smelled of mothballs and old regrets. He listened patiently as I recounted my story, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he let out a long, slow sigh. "I warned them, you know," he said, his voice raspy. "The Silveras. I told them the house had a bad history. People don't listen. They see a good price, a big yard. They don't feel the cold spots." He leaned forward, his expression grim. "I found things in my own investigation, stories from the locals. A family in the 70s who lost a child to a freak accident. a couple in the 90s who suffered a violent mutual psychosis. I put it in my unofficial notes, but the department buried it. Who wants to declare a house legally evil? He confirmed my worst fears. The entity, the lingering will of Elias Thorne, fed on domestic harmony. It drew families in with a facade of peace. Then slowly, insidiously, it would corrupt their happiness, feeding on their fear and despair until it consumed them entirely. The music box was the key, the focal point of the curse. Get rid of the diary. Walk away from the house. Forget you ever heard of the Silveras, Silva urged, his eyes pleading. Some things aren't meant to be solved, detective. They're meant to be survived. But I couldn't. I was a detective. My job was to find the truth, to bring closure. And now, I felt a terrible responsibility. The Silveras weren't just missing. They were trapped. I had to do something. It was a choice born of arrogance and duty, a choice that would cost me everything. The moment I decided to fight back was the moment the house declared war. The subtlety was gone. The haunting was no longer a series of whispers and suggestions. It was a full-blown assault. The entity in the house, the cold, possessive will of Elias Thorne, knew that I understood its nature, and it dropped all pretense. It wanted me gone, or better yet, broken. My apartment, once my sanctuary, became a forward operating base for the enemy. The music box melody was a constant low-level hum in my ears, a soundtrack to my fraying sanity. I'd be woken in the middle of the night by the sharp, distinct sound of a door slamming shut inside the house, miles away, yet as clear as if it were in the next room. Shadows in my peripheral vision were no longer fleeting. They coalesced, taking on a tall, gaunt shape that mimicked the faded photographs of Elias Thorne. It would stand in doorways, at the end of my bed, a silent, oppressive presence that radiated pure malevolence. It began to use my own mind against me. Whispers would snake through my thoughts, spoken in my own voice, dredging up every failure, every regret, every insecurity I had ever harbored. It told me Miguel was right, that I was losing my mind. It showed me images of the Silvera children, their eyes wide with terror, their faces accusing. You could have saved us. You are too late. The attacks escalated from psychological to physical. I would wake up with long, thin scratches on my arms, the kind a fingernail might make on wood. A heavy book launched itself off my shelf, missing my head by inches. The cold wasn't just in the house anymore. It followed me, pockets of unnatural frost in the humid Brazilian air. I was living in a state of constant, high-alert dread. Sleep offered no escape, only nightmares of long, dark corridors, and a little girl's weeping that twisted into the cruel, mocking laughter of an old man. I tried to fight back with the tools of my old world. I brought in a priest, a friend of my family, to bless the house. The entity's response was immediate and violent. As the priest began his prayers, a wind tore through the sealed house, slamming every door and shattering every window in a symphony of destruction. The priest fled, pale and trembling, telling me that what was in that house was something ancient and deeply rooted, beyond his power to command. My last tether to the rational world was Miguel. I called him, my voice cracking with desperation, and begged him to come to the house to see what I was seeing. He refused. "Arthur, listen to yourself," he pleaded over the phone. "You're obsessed. The captain has put you on mandatory leave. Get help, please. Before you do something you can't take back." The line went dead. He was gone. My ally had abandoned me, convinced I was a lost cause. The isolation was complete. I was a man on a raft, and everyone on the shore was convinced I was drowning in a calm sea. My attempts to escape were futile. I packed a bag, intending to drive to another city, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed place. But my car wouldn't start. The next day, the battery was inexplicably drained. A taxi I called broke down 2 blocks from my apartment. The house wouldn't let me leave. Its influence was spreading, a cancer growing from that plot of land to encompass my entire existence. The diary was my only guide, my terrible roadmap. In my frantic, sleep-deprived state, I reread Elias's final entries, searching for a weakness. He spoke of the binding, of how the anchor, The music box needed to be charged with emotional energy. It fed on joy, twisting it into despair. It needed a willing subject within its walls to sustain its power. It couldn't be destroyed, but perhaps it could be starved. This was the terrifying lesson I learned through suffering. I couldn't win, but I might be able to force a stalemate. My life had become a desperate attempt at survival, a frantic search for a way to break the cycle. I had lost my connection to the real world, my job, my friend. All I had left was the all-consuming terror and the grim, burgeoning understanding that to confront this evil, I would have to step into its world completely. The end came in the heart of a storm. Rain lashed against the windows of the house, each gust of wind sounding like a mournful howl. I was there, of course. I hadn't left in days, a prisoner in the very place I sought to understand. The final confrontation wasn't a choice, it was an inevitability. The house was done playing with me. It was time to feed. I was in the master bedroom, the diary open on the floor, its pages lit by the frantic, dancing beam of my flashlight. The power had been out for hours. The entity's presence was suffocating, a physical weight in the air that made it hard to breathe. The music box melody, which had been a constant hum, grew louder, clearer, until it was the only sound in the world, drowning out the storm, my own heartbeat, everything. Then, he appeared. Not as a shadow, but as a fully formed apparition at the foot of the bed. Elias Thorne. He looked as he did in the old photographs, a tall, severe man in a dark suit, but his form was made of shifting smoke and pure hatred. His eyes were hollow pits of darkness that promised nothing but oblivion. He didn't speak in words, but in feelings, in images projected directly into my mind. He showed me Miguel, finding my body, shaking his head in pity at another detective who couldn't handle the job. He showed me the Silvera family, their ghostly forms trapped within the walls, their faces etched with an eternity of silent screaming. He showed me Eleonora, a weeping specter forever bound to her father's rage. He offered me a place among them. Join us. Cease your struggle. Your pain will end. This was the final temptation, the sweet release of surrender. Part of me, the exhausted, terrified, broken part, wanted to accept, but the detective in me, the stubborn fool who started this whole mess, refused to close the case. I knew I couldn't destroy him. Silva was right, but the diary had given me one desperate, terrible idea. Elias had bound his daughter's soul using an anchor and an act of will fueled by possessive love. To break the connection, even temporarily, I had to sever the emotional fuel line. I couldn't fight his hatred with strength, but perhaps I could poison his food source. My sacrifice had to be real. It had to be something precious. The entity fed on joy, on love, on hope. I had to offer it something so pure that the act of consuming it would be like swallowing ash. I closed my eyes, and I focused not on fear, but on the single happiest memory I possessed. It was a simple one, a childhood afternoon fishing with my father, the sun warm on my face, the easy silence between us filled with a profound and unspoken love. It was the cornerstone of every good thing I believed about myself. I held that memory in my mind, polished it until it shone, and I offered it up. Take it, I projected with all my will. This is what you want. Take it and leave me be. The entity recoiled, then lunged. The feeling was indescribable. It was a psychic violation, a spiritual theft. I felt that memory being ripped from me, not just forgotten, but erased. The warmth, the love, the image of my father's smile, it all turned to gray, tasteless dust. The emotional connection to it vanished, leaving behind only a cold, factual knowledge that such an event had occurred. A gaping hole was torn in the fabric of my soul. The apparition of Elias Thorne shrieked, a sound of pure rage and frustration, and dissolved. The music box melody snapped off into utter silence. The oppressive weight in the room lifted. The storm outside seemed to quiet. For the first time in weeks, I was alone. I stumbled out of that house as the sun rose, a stranger in my own skin. I survived, but survival is not victory. The man who walked out was not the same one who walked in. The world, once a place of logic and reason, was now a thin veil stretched over an abyss of unimaginable horror. I wrote my final report, citing a hidden gas leak from an old pipe as the probable cause for the Silvera's demise. A collective, slow poisoning that led to disorientation and their wandering off into the dense woods behind the house, never to be found. The case was closed. The house was condemned. But I know the truth. The entity is still there. Starved, weakened, but waiting. I severed my connection to it, but the curse remains. I am a marked man, a witness to a truth no one else can see. The scar it left on my soul is a permanent cold spot where a cherished memory used to be. I no longer feel joy, only a muted spectrum of gray. My peace is gone, replaced by a constant, vigilant watchfulness. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think I can hear a faint, tinny melody on the edge of hearing, a reminder that the evil was not defeated. It was only fed, and it will get hungry again.